The HOA president actually laughed when I told her she was sitting inside my building. She insisted the association had community rights, as though that somehow outweighed the deed. So I gave her one fair warning. She ignored it. 30 days later, the same office they claimed belonged to them became the most humiliating public auction our neighborhood had ever witnessed. But before any of that happened, I was just a man trying to understand why unfamiliar cars kept showing up outside my old town hall. The building had been in my family for years. It wasn't anything luxurious, but it carried a lot of history. It had solid brick walls, old wooden floors that creaked under your feet, a small stage at the back, and that familiar scent every aging building seems to have. Some people love it, while others pretend they don't notice it. Years ago, the town used the hall for meetings, voter registrations, and holiday charity events. It was the kind of place where some people came to take care of business, while others mostly came because someone always brought cookies. When the town relocated to a newer office across the highway, my uncle purchased the old hall. After he passed away, it became mine. I mainly used it for storage and stopped by every month or two to make sure everything was fine. Then I started noticing cars parked there on Thursday evenings. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had the wrong address. Maybe a group assumed it was still public property. I've lived long enough to know every misunderstanding doesn't need lawyers involved. But those Thursday night gatherings kept happening. Later, I learned they weren't new at all. Those meetings had quietly been taking place for years. Then one Saturday morning, I drove over and found a bright plastic sign hanging on the front door. Willow Creek HOA office, board members only. Board members only. On my door. I owned the building, yet apparently I wasn't important enough to walk through its entrance. The HOA was led by Marlene, a woman who acted like every mailbox, driveway, and blade of grass in the neighborhood answered to her. From what I could see through the window, they hadn't simply borrowed the building. They had completely moved in. There were folding chairs, office desks, filing cabinets, a coffee maker, a bulletin board covered with notices, and even a fake plant sitting by the window. That fake plant probably had more legal right to be there than they did. Before I could unlock the side entrance, Marlene came walking across the gravel parking lot with a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Sir," she said, "you can't park here during HOA office hours." That was impressive. I had just been trespassed on by people who were now giving me parking instructions. I looked at her and calmly said, "Marlene, this is my building." She laughed. "We've been using this property for years," she replied. "At this point, it's basically a community facility." I didn't bother arguing because arguing with Marlene looked like a full-time occupation. Instead, I went home and opened my uncle's old property file. What I found answered every question. It proved two things. The HOA had always known the building wasn't theirs. And Marlene had already been warned long before she ever told me where I could park. The proof didn't come from another board member. It came from Marlene herself. 4 years earlier, she had written to my uncle asking if the HOA could temporarily use the old town hall while searching for a permanent meeting place. My uncle replied in plain, simple language. No long-term use. No setting up an office. No storing belongings. No posting public notices from that address. There was nothing unclear about it. They hadn't misunderstood his answer. They simply treated no like it was something they could ignore. Behind that letter was a handwritten note from my uncle. He was old-fashioned, the type who labeled every envelope, kept every receipt, and believed a handshake still meant something. His note read, "Joey still using hall. Told Marlene again to leave. She smiled and said they'd be out soon." He had underlined the word again twice. That was his quiet way of saying he'd had enough. At that moment, I stopped believing this was an honest mistake. Marlene hadn't accidentally turned my building into an HOA office. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had simply built an excuse instead of asking for permission. So I called a local attorney, a calm older man who looked like he'd handled every neighborhood dispute imaginable. I showed him the deed, the letters, photos of the HOA sign, and even the warning Marlene had handed me for parking outside my own building. He adjusted his glasses, looked through everything, and said, "Well, they certainly made themselves at home." That was lawyer language for these people are about to have a very bad day. He helped me send the HOA board an official legal notice. It gave them 30 days to stop using the building, remove every belonging, return every key, and leave the property completely. No yelling, no threats, just dates, signatures, and the kind of legal wording that suddenly makes confident people pay attention. I honestly thought that would settle everything. It didn't. 3 days later, Marlene emailed me with the subject line, "Unauthorized interference with community operations." Community operations. Inside my building. She claimed the HOA had established long-term use of the property and argued that forcing them out would damage neighborhood governance. Then she added one more thing. She warned that touching any of the furniture would be considered theft of HOA property. It was an incredibly bold statement. Not a smart one. Just bold. My attorney told me to keep every piece of evidence. So I saved everything. Every email. Every envelope. Every photo. Every notice carrying my building's address as though the HOA actually owned it. Then he explained something that made Marlene's confidence far more dangerous for her than for me. Under the local abandoned property laws, once proper notice had been served and the waiting period expired, anything they left inside could legally be removed and sold through a public auction. That meant every folding chair, every desk, every filing cabinet, the coffee machine, even that fake plant, had exactly 30 days to find a new home. For the next several weeks, they did what overly confident people usually do. Nothing at all. Not a single box was packed. Not one cabinet was emptied. No one even came to collect a chair. It was as if they believed ignoring the notice would somehow erase it. Day after day passed. The deadline got closer. Still nothing. Finally, on day 29, Marlene sent one last email. It contained only one sentence. "You won't touch our property." The moment I read it, I realized something. Day 30 wasn't just going to be another legal deadline. It was about to become a public spectacle. Day 30 arrived with clear skies and a quiet morning, which somehow made what was about to happen even more amusing. By 8 o'clock, my attorney, the auctioneer, and a town clerk were standing beside me outside the old hall. Everything had been done by the book. The notice had been delivered. The waiting period had expired. The public auction had been properly advertised. And the HOA had left every single item inside as if confidence alone could protect it. The auctioneer glanced at the sign on the door, opened his clipboard, and said, "Well, this is certainly a first." I smiled and replied, "Just wait another 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, the first cars started arriving. At first, it was only a few neighbors who had seen the auction notice. Then more vehicles pulled in. Then even more. Some people came planning to bid. Others simply carried coffee and wanted to watch. A few had that slow, curious walk older neighbors have when they insist they're not looking for drama, even though they absolutely are. By 9 o'clock, nearly half the neighborhood had gathered outside the building the HOA had proudly called its headquarters. Then Marlene showed up. She climbed out of her car with 2 board members following close behind. All 3 looked like they'd just watched something extremely valuable catch fire. "What is going on here?" she demanded. The auctioneer calmly answered, "A lawful public auction of abandoned property." Marlene immediately pointed toward the building. "Everything inside belongs to the HOA." My attorney replied without raising his voice. "It was left inside private property after proper legal notice." For the first time, Marlene still had her clipboard, but none of the authority that usually came with it. She looked around the crowd as if someone would step forward and rescue her. Nobody did. A few neighbors simply took another sip of their coffee. The auction began with the coffee machine. A neighbor named Howard won it for $6 and joked, "I hope it only brews HOA-approved coffee." The crowd laughed softly, the kind of laugh adults share when they know they're watching a story they'll be talking about for years. Next came the folding chairs. The same chairs where the board had probably spent years debating fence colors, mailbox styles, and flower pots that were apparently a little too colorful. One neighbor bought 4 of them and smiled. "I'm taking these fishing." That earned another round of quiet laughter. Then the filing cabinet was rolled outside. Marlene's expression immediately changed. But before the sale, the town clerk had already inspected it. Every personal document and active record had been removed, documented, and boxed for proper return. The cabinet itself, however, was officially up for auction. The filing cabinet sold for $18. Next came the large meeting table. It took 2 men to carry it outside, and the moment it reached the sidewalk, someone in the crowd called out, "Does the rulebook come with it?" Even the auctioneer had to hide a smile. Marlene made one last attempt to stop everything. "You're humiliating this board," she said. I looked at her and replied, "No, Marlene, I gave this board 30 days. The embarrassment was entirely your own doing." The final item was the fake plant. A kind elderly woman from a couple of streets away bought it for $1 and laughed. "I'm putting it on my front porch where it can finally belong somewhere honestly." By noon, the old town hall was completely empty. Desks, no folding chairs, no coffee machine, no board members only sign. Just my building, exactly as it should have been. The following week, the HOA held an emergency meeting in someone's garage. From what I heard afterward, many members wanted to know why the board had spent 4 years running the HOA from a building they never owned. 2 weeks later, Marlene resigned before the board could officially remove her. Sometimes leaving early is simply another way of admitting you've already lost. After everything was over, I cleaned up the hall, replaced every lock, and eventually rented the building to a local veterans breakfast group. They always paid their rent on time. They asked permission before hanging up signs. And not once did anyone tell me I wasn't allowed to park outside my own property. For 4 years, they acted as though my building belonged to them. When it was all over, the only thing they truly walked away with was public embarrassment, and a lesson they'll never forget about what real property ownership actually means.